Good morning. It's good to have you all with us. I think we'll have a few more people joining as church is over and they start to come down, but we'll get started this morning. This morning we have as our guest speaker, Rabbi Bonnie Margulis, and she is the founder and executive director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice and chair of the Wisconsin Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, as well as a member of the board of the NAACP of Dane County and a founder and steering committee member for the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. She was a founding board member of We Are Many, United Against Hate. She holds a master's degree in Judaic Studies from New York University and was ordained at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio. She served for 12 years as the director of clergy programming for the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. And she has served as a member of the Central Conference of American Rabbis for Justice and Peace, and is a past chair of the Women's Rabbinic Network Social Justice Committee. She served as a member of the J Street National Advisory Board for Field and Grassroots Organizing. And she is proud to have been a member of the Reformed Jewish Movement's Commission on Social Action, where she sat on the Women and Minorities Task Force. She has served as rabbi of the Blacksburg Jewish Community Center and the Virginia Polytechnic Institute Hillel. And during that time, she also was the coordinator of the Shenandoah Friends of Planned Parenthood, as a grassroots education and advocacy group dedicated to preserving reproductive freedom. She has taught courses in Judaism and in Hebrew Bible at Washington and Lee University and at James Madison University in Virginia, and has been an adjunct faculty member in the Religious Studies Department here at Edgewood College. The title for the topic this morning is Moving from Charity to Justice, the work of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. And she will share with us the work of the Faith Voices for Justice, including the upcoming activities and events. And we're very fortunate to have her with us today. Pastor Katie shared with me Bonnie's schedule for the day, which is basically what the resume was again. She's here this morning working on faith and justice, and then she's canvassing. Ben, our social chair, isn't going to canvass today because of his knee, but she's canvassing for the upcoming election. And then this evening, she is speaking on reproductive rights for women. I don't know where, but
at Hillel.
At Hillel. So she's still active and deeply engaged in all of these issues. And I'm just so happy that we have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this morning. I understand it's Palm Sunday. And so I see all these beautiful palm fronds walking around. So that's really nice. We're moving into a very important, well, we're actually in the middle of a very important season of spring holidays. Ramadan started March 22nd. Passover starts this Wednesday night. Easter is on Sunday. We are in a whole month-long series of spring festivals for our Wiccan and nature spiritualist friends. There's so much going on, so much to celebrate and to look forward to during this month of all these different kinds of celebrations. And this intersection of all these different faiths having all these sort of converging holidays is kind of emblematic of the work that I do, because it's very, very deeply rooted in working among faith communities and within faith communities and bringing different faith communities together. Last night, we held our 7th annual Ramadan Interfaith Iftar, our Break the Fast dinner. And it was only the second time since the pandemic that we've been back in person. And so it was very exciting. Last year, we were back in person in a very limited way because of the pandemic. But last night we said, nope, anybody who wants to come can come. And we're going back to potluck, which is the way it ought to be. And it was tremendous. And we had probably about 120 people and amazing food. And we had a little presentation about Islam and Ramadan and Iftar and Zakat charity, which is an important element of Ramadan and of Islam. And so it was a wonderful night. And so it's just been a whole weekend of things going on. Our synagogue had social action Shabbat Friday night, and we had a speaker from Law Forward who came and talked about the threats to our democracy and the ways that we all can get engaged, in the ways that that he saw hope and the silver lining. So not all gloom and doom and despair, which was good. We don't like that, right? So Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice is in our 12th year. We actually started unofficially in 2011 with the uprising at the Capitol. And I know that you all are very familiar with those events and the fact that the faith community was very involved and very engaged in that effort. At one point, we had 100 clergy marching into the Capitol chanting, "This is what religion looks like." My colleagues and I all took turns speaking at the different rallies. Each faith community took an evening, and for those 6 weeks or so, there was a different faith group every night that had a candlelight vigil at the Capitol. So we were all very engaged and involved. And at one point, we decided we really needed to tell the governor, from the perspective of the faith community, that we thought that what was happening was not really reflective of the values and the beliefs and the morals of the people of Wisconsin. So the governor wouldn't meet with us. Shocking, I know. But we did get a meeting with some of his staff, and we could try to convey that message and didn't get too far. The two worldviews just clashed, or couldn't clash because they didn't meet. At the end of the meeting, one of the governor's staff said, "Well, we really just all want the same thing, right? We just really want everybody to be self-sufficient." And we said, "That's not what we want, and that's not the world that we live in, and that's not the way it works." So after that meeting, some of us sort of stayed behind to debrief, and what is our role and responsibility as a faith community to address what was happening in our state. And so we did some work for about a year as concerned religious leaders of Wisconsin. And after about a year, we decided, you know what, we're not going anywhere. The issues aren't going away. We're not losing momentum because every day there's a new thing. And so that's when we officially in 2012 became Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. We have grown exponentially in the issues that we work on, in the projects and programs that we have, and in our amazing roster of volunteers and people who are engaged in this work. Some of you are sitting here today. So our mission basically is to work through clergy and congregations and people of faith and people of no faith all over the state and get them engaged, give them the tools, the resources, the education, the opportunities that they need to get engaged in the public square, to raise our faith voices in the public square, and to really work for those policies that we believe will really lift up everybody in Wisconsin and make it possible for everybody to thrive, regardless of race or age or ethnicity or ability or faith background or immigration status or sexual orientation or gender identity, that everybody has a right to thrive in this state and in this country. So we do it through a number of different programs, projects, coalitions, events, all kinds of things and ways that you all can get engaged if you aren't already. As I said, I know a lot of you already are. We run a coalition called Dignity at Work. We co-lead it with Worker Justice Wisconsin. And Dignity at Work is a coalition of some faith groups, some direct service organizations, some advocacy organizations, some labor unions. And we come together to work on a constellation of issues that make for dignified labor that help the worker to sustain their families. So it's things like equal pay, living wage, sustainable hours, paid sick leave, paid family leave, affordable childcare, access to public transportation, affordable housing, gender discrimination, racial discrimination, pension protection, and the right to organize. And we bring together all these different groups that work in different ways on different issues so that we can bring them all together. They can share with each other what these issues are, what they're working on, and we can find ways to support each other and increase all of our different organizations' capacity to do this work, and really to connect the dots that if you're working on childcare over here, and you're working on transportation over there, and you're working on living wage over here, all these things are interconnected and really need to be worked on as a whole because they all depend upon each other. I know you all know very well that we are the lead founding organization for the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. And that coalition has become so powerful and so important in our community. And I want those of you who are involved and engaged to know how really important and valued your work has been. And if you're not already engaged, there's plenty of work to do, right? So we have a volunteer driver program where we recruit people and we train them, and they volunteer to drive undocumented people to Milwaukee for their ICE check-ins or to Chicago for their immigration hearings. We've been having rides where we pick people up who are leaving detention in Dodge County and bringing them here if this is where they have a sponsor and this is where they're landing. We've also done just some local drives to help people get to medical appointments and things like that. Our immigration partners, our immigration attorneys tell us this service is so invaluable. So many of their clients would just have no other recourse, no way to get to these appointments that are so crucial to their being able to be successful in their attempts to stay in this country legally. And we're the only agency locally that's providing this service. We always need more drivers. We just had a training last week, and we put the video from the training up on our YouTube channel. So look on YouTube for the Dane Sanctuary Coalition and watch that training and get in touch with Dan Zimmerman, who is the coordinator of this program, if you are able to volunteer to be standby for when these requests come for these rides. We are also starting a project to try to recruit people who maybe you have a spare room in your house. Maybe you have kids who are off to college, or you have a in-laws apartment that's gone unused, or you just have a spare guest room or bedroom, and you're able to provide home hospitality for somebody for a few weeks or a few months. We won't talk about Tony. She's a special case. But it's been wonderful, hasn't it? Exactly. It's getting only more wonderful. So these are some of the things that the Dane Sanctuary Coalition is engaged in. Also, of course, education, trying to raise awareness about the issues around our immigration system and the cruelty and the inhumanity of our immigration system and the way that it really is endangering people's lives, and what we can do as advocates to try to address those policies and try to affect change. There is going to be a lobby day coming up with Voces de la Frontera. Whenever it comes to policy issues, they are our go-to organization. They take the lead in public policy and advocacy. And so they are having an advocacy day here in Madison on April 19th. If you get our e-newsletter, you will see information coming forward, or if you're on the Dane Sanctuary Google list, you'll see information about that coming up. They're also doing their annual May Day Without Latinas and Immigrants. It's always May 1st. They take turns between doing it in Madison or in Milwaukee. This year it's going to be in Milwaukee. And we are just getting details right now about exactly how that's going to look. So again, look out for information about that upcoming event. As Ken said, we are canvassing this afternoon. We co-lead with the Wisconsin Council of Churches, the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign. And I have some bookmarks back there from what we fancifully call WIVIC. That will tell you a little bit more about that campaign and give you some helpful websites to look at. So the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign works across the state, again, across clergy and congregations to recruit our clergy and congregations to get engaged in voter education, voter registration, get out the vote, and also in advocacy for voting rights and for fair maps. So this afternoon, we are canvassing with Fair Wisconsin, which is a statewide LGBTQ equity organization, and we're going to be on the east side canvassing in low voter turnout neighborhoods. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. All of the work that we do is nonpartisan. We don't talk about party, we don't talk about candidate, we only talk about the issues. And when it comes to our voter engagement work, we are only talking about the importance of getting out to vote. We don't tell you who to vote for, we don't tell you how to vote, but we tell you you must go out and vote. So through the Wisconsin Faith Voter Engagement Campaign, we do voter registration events, we do webinars to educate people about civics and civil rights and voting issues. We do these kinds of canvassing and writing postcards to low propensity voters. We do work with teens to educate them about the importance of voting, because it's never too early to start getting kids down the path of understanding that this is something that is their right and their responsibility, and something that they should do as soon as they're old enough. So tremendous amount of work. I hope you all know there's an election coming up on Tuesday, right? How many have already voted? Great. How many have a plan to vote on Tuesday? Great. You have your ID? Have the right ID? Perfect. Okay. There are 3 referenda on the ballot. How many know what those referenda are? How many of you who've already voted, when you got to your ballot and you looked at it, thought, wow, what is this? I didn't know this was here. I don't know what it means. I don't know how to vote. Yeah. Referenda are deliberately written to be confusing. They're deliberately written with no context. There's no person standing next to the voting booth saying, let me explain to you what these referenda are before you vote. So it's really important that you go, before you go vote, go to myvote.wi.gov and look up what's on my ballot and find out. And then you can see, oh, there's these referenda. I didn't know these were there. And go do more research and find out what they're all about. So there are 2 referenda on the ballot right now that have to do with incarceration. So one of them broadens the criteria under which a judge could keep somebody in detention pre-trial. So they haven't been convicted of anything. They haven't even been tried yet. They are just in jail waiting for their trial. There's a very, very similar referendum that similarly increases the criteria under which a judge could impose cash bail and keep somebody in jail indefinitely. These referenda disproportionately harm Black and brown people because they are disproportionately incarcerated. Wisconsin has one of the highest, if not the highest, incarceration rate of Black and brown residents. And they are then kept in detention for long periods of time before they've ever even gone to trial. And they may get to trial and be exonerated, be found not guilty. But in the meantime, they've been in jail. And because they've been in jail, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their homes, they've lost custody of their children, and their lives have been turned upside down, and they may not even have actually been guilty of something. The third referendum says, do you think that able-bodied adults without dependent children should be required to work in order to receive benefits? It doesn't give you, again, any context or understanding of what any of this means. First of all, there already are federal work requirements, so this bill won't do anything. It doesn't describe or define able-bodied. So you could be physically able-bodied, and people think, well, why aren't you working? But you could have hidden health challenges. You could have mental health challenges. You could have all kinds of other things going on in your life, which makes it difficult for you to keep a job. And that reality is not reflected in this bill or in the way the laws are implemented. And without dependent children, you are defined as not having dependent children if you are not the custodial parent. But you could still very well have children, and you could still very well have childcare responsibilities for those children. But because you are not the custodial parent, you are not recognized as being an adult with dependent children. So all kinds of ways in which these referenda are very damaging. So when you go to, if you have not yet voted, when you go to the voting booth, think about what your values are and what you care about, what's important to you, and think about how you want to vote on those bills. We work with the Wisconsin Council of Churches. That's a continuing refrain. They are our ongoing and amazing partners. But we also, along with Wisconsin Council of Churches, work with the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, with Wisdom, with Micah, which is the Milwaukee equivalent of Moses here, and a number of other faith-based organizations. We've been meeting every Monday for the last 2 years and talking about what our role and responsibility is as faith-based organizations to counter white Christian nationalism and systemic racism. And from those conversations, we have developed a number of different programs. So one is called Taking a Faithful Stance for Equity. And I have some flyers back there, which will give you a little bit more information and a link for how to get involved. Taking a Faithful Stand for Equity asks you to take a pledge. And that pledge says, I'm going to pay attention to what's going on in my local school boards, in my local governments. And when I see an issue of equity, I'm going to go to that school board meeting and I'm going to testify. I'm going to bring a friend with me. I'm going to make my friend testify. I'm going to then tell you all, the leadership, that this is happening. So then we can reach out to other folks in your region and say, hey, did you know that this thing is happening? Did you know that they're trying to ban books? Did you know that they're trying to keep trans kids from playing sports? Did you know that they're trying to prevent teaching of slavery and the Civil War and Jim Crow? Do you know that those things are going on in your school district, and you need to go to that school board meeting and you need to testify? And you need to testify as a person of faith, because it's so important for people to hear that the faith community cares about these issues and cares about equity and cares about everybody in Wisconsin having a right to have a full and complete and accurate education and history of our country. If our kids don't know how we got to where we are today, they will not have the tools that they need to make a better future for themselves for tomorrow. Because so often our legislatures and our school districts are trying to prevent those things from being taught, one of the things that our group, which we call Creating Beloved Community from Martin Luther King Jr. sermon, one of the things that Creating Beloved Community has done, in addition to taking a faithful stance for equity, every second week of October, we have Teach the Truth Wisconsin. And we ask you all to find some kind of location in your area that has a history to it that's connected to racial justice, to Native American justice, to LGBTQ justice, to justice for religious minorities, whatever it is. Pick some place that has some history around one of those issues and create a video. Be as creative as you can. Do a pop-up lecture, do a walking tour, do a rap song, do a TikTok dance, do whatever you want, and videotape it and send us a videotape, the recording, and then we put it up on the Teach the Truth website and on our YouTube channels. Because if our state is going to prevent our schools from teaching these truths about our history, then we, the faith community, have to take up that challenge and teach those lessons. We have a very active interfaith community building series of projects and programs that we do. We have 2 interfaith clergy councils. One is based in the greater Dane County area called Multi-Faith Coalition for South Central Wisconsin. Your clergy have been involved in that. We've got 2 events coming up over the course of this year. We're doing our 2nd annual Pride service. It's going to be at Bethany United Methodist Church on August 21st. So right after Pride Festival, which is that Sunday, the 21st, we're having an interfaith service to demonstrate the faith community support for our LGBTQ siblings. And then similarly, November 20th, we're having our third annual Transgender Day of Remembrance Interfaith Service, which is this year going to be hosted at Fitchburg Memorial United Church of Christ. As I said, we just had our iftar last night, so you'll have to wait another year for next year's, but be on the lookout for it. Everybody's very excited. And we just started a new program called Interfaith Intersections. So for 2 years, we did a project called Sacred Site Visits. We took people of different faiths and we would take them to visit different faith communities. So we would go to a Lutheran church, we would go to a Unitarian congregation, we would go to a synagogue, we would go to a mosque, we would go to a Buddhist temple, we would go to the Sikh temple, we would go to the Hindu temple, and we would have an opportunity to meet with the clergy or the faith leader and get a little orientation to that faith community. Then we would have the opportunity to experience a worship service, and afterwards have some Q&A and some time to debrief and to have some social time. So we did this in person in 2019, 2020 with the pandemic, we kind of were on hiatus. In 2021, we did it sort of virtual for a while and then kind of hybrid. And then we started to think about what's the next thing? How do we build and deepen and really expand on these opportunities for people of different faiths to come together and learn from each other? So we started a program called Interfaith Intersections. We had our first one March 9th. It was going to be in person. There was a bit of a snowstorm, you might remember. At the utter last minute, we pivoted to doing it all online, which worked out fine. And at each of these events, what we do is we pose a question, and we have a panel of 3 or 4 folks from different faith communities, and they address that question on the panel. And then we break out into small groups so that people have a chance to wrestle with that question in small groups. And then we come back and we sort of debrief a little bit. So the key to this project is that the panel are all you guys. They are the people in the pews. They are not the clergy. They're not the folks who are standing up in the pulpit. They are not academics. They're not people who are teaching at the university. These are people of faith, the lay people, who are just going to talk about, I'm not going to tell you Judaism teaches this about this question, but I'm going to tell you as a Jew, this is what I think about this question, and this is how I live this out in my life. So the question that we posed was, where does your sense of moral authority come from? And we had people coming from all different faith backgrounds, and they talked about what this meant to them from their own faith journey. So we're doing this again May 18th. It's going to be at Temple Beth El, and it starts at 7 o'clock. So it's going to be in person at Beth El, but it will also be on Zoom. So you can register and come in person, or you can get the Zoom link and be online. And we have our panelists are coming from the Catholic tradition, the Baha'i tradition, and the Wiccan nature spiritualist tradition. And they are again going to address that question of moral authority. We're going to be doing it again in the fall. We have a couple of dates lined up and a couple of panelists lined up, but the questions are going to be different in the fall. One of our questions for one of our fall dates is going to be just a very broad question of what do you see as the most basic, fundamental, foundational beliefs and tenets of your faith? So that's going to be in our October event. I think it's October 9th. I'm going to get that wrong. And then in November, I think November 12th, we're going to pose a different question. We're going to pose a question about what people feel or believe or think happens as you are approaching the end of your life and after death. So those are some of the questions that we're going to be wrestling with. We hope that this is going to be a program that's going to grow and that's going to continue. We're kind of modeling it on a program that's been going on in Dubuque for over 10 years. And they regularly get 100 people coming to these events. So we're hoping that we're going to grow by leaps and bounds over the years and wrestle with all different kinds of questions over the years and have folks from all different faith communities. And again, perhaps people of no faith who want to come and talk and wrestle with some of these questions and issues. We have our annual celebration coming up. It's June 1st. It's going to be all online. We're very excited. Our keynote speakers are Representative Christina Shelton and Representative Francesca Hong, and they are going to be talking about their Economic Justice Bill of Rights, which they just a couple weeks ago reintroduced into the Assembly. All of the things that I talked about that Dignity at Work works on, they are all enshrined in the Economic Justice Bill of Rights, and we helped on a small scale to help them craft and update the original bill that they had introduced a couple of years ago. So we're very excited that they're going to come and talk about that work and the importance of really what it means to have a Bill of Rights around economic equity in our state. And we're also giving our Voice for Justice Award to Reverend Jerry Hancock to honor him for his years of ministry in prisons. So we're very excited about this event. It is also very upfront and clear and transparent. It is our annual fundraiser. So we will be asking for donations and talking a little bit about our work over the last year and what we hope to continue to be doing in the year to come. So I mentioned VOCES's Lobby Day on April 19th. There are also 2 other lobby days that we are partnering and co-sponsoring. Conservation Voices is having their lobby day on April 25th, and Fair Wisconsin is holding LGBTQ Equity Day on May 10th, and we're engaged in all 3 of those efforts, and hope that you all will come out and help us lobby. One of the things that we do is we have a workshop called Moving from Charity to Justice. And it is an opportunity for us to be able to talk with congregations and people of faith about why the faith community needs to be involved in this work. Why is advocacy so important? And why is this something that the faith community, congregations and individuals and clergy need to be engaged in? And why this does not violate your 501c3. You will not endanger your tax status. And it is something that is deeply rooted in all of our faith traditions. I cannot think of a single faith tradition that does not teach about the importance of engaging in helping to feed the poor, to clothe the naked, to house the homeless, to have justice for the workers, to safeguard the environment. All of these things that we are taught to do, we are taught because it is our faith understanding that that is our role and responsibility as people of faith. And it's moving from charity to justice because so many of our congregations I know are already engaged in such important charity work, are already engaged in housing people, are engaged in running food pantries, are engaged in being shelters, in giving temporary shelter to folks. All the important work that you all do every day that saves lives and is so crucial. But my message to you is if you are not also engaged in the advocacy piece of it, then you're going to be feeding the hungry and housing the homeless until the end of time. And I don't think that that's what any of us want to be doing at the end of days. So we have to be involved as a faith community to say, this is what our morals are. These are what our values are. This is what our faith teaches us is important. And we want the policies and the laws and the programs of our state and our country to reflect those values and those teachings. Not to impose our faith on anybody, but to say, this is what I believe, and that's why I do this work. So I hope that you'll get engaged if you're not already. I know many of you are in some of the things that I've mentioned. Nobody is obligated to do everything. My favorite quote from the Talmud, Rabbi Tarfon said, nobody is required to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. So pick one thing that you're passionate about, one thing that you care about, if it's voting or if it's immigration, or if it's LGBTQ rights, or if it's reproductive justice, or any of the things that you care about. Pick that one thing that you're most passionate about and find a way to get involved. You can get involved with Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, and I certainly hope that you will. But there's also tons of other organizations out there that are doing amazing work. find what you care about and find the organization that works for you and do get engaged. I'm happy to hear your responses, questions, thoughts, suggestions, something that we're not doing that you wish we were. Can't imagine because we're doing so much, but there are things that we don't do. There are things that we don't do because there's other groups out there already doing it from a faith perspective, like Faith in Place, which is doing advocacy work from a faith perspective on the environment. And we support and work with them, but they take the lead on that. Or criminal justice reform, Moses and Wisdom take the lead on that. And we're here to help and support them with that work. But we don't take the lead on that because we don't want to duplicate effort or reinvent the wheel.
David in the back of the microphone.
Thank you very much. We sat across from one another at the International Women's Day at First Congregational. I kept thinking, who is that person? I recognize them. But when you said we can't, you know, each person can't do everything, but I did wonder where you would intersect with the whole health situation. Because all of the things, in a sense, that you've talked about would be and or are affecting particularly people with health conditions and particularly people with mental illness. And Dane County has gone down substantially in how it's interacting and helping people with mental illness. I mean, it's really declined.
Yes, so thank you for raising that. So we actually, I skipped over it because there was so much. I was like, oh, I got to cut something. So that's what I cut. We actually do have a very active project and program around health, around public health, including mental health. So we started around the pandemic. We started something, again, in partnership with Wisconsin Council of Churches, called Faithful Action for Healthy Wisconsin. And it originally was around COVID. We did a ton of work around COVID, both with this project and also with Worker Justice Wisconsin. We did a lot of work, particularly with the immigrant community around making sure that they understood about the vaccine and were getting vaccinated. But in the last couple of years, we have broadened that work to look more generally at the intersection of healthcare and racism. And we have started a project. We're going to be piloting a workshop in Watertown. Fingers crossed that we get the grant that we're looking for. We are working with UW Population Health. They have a project to change the narrative, to really stop talking about health care and personal and individual health care and individual responsibility to go see your doctor or to get health insurance, as important as those things are, but to look more broadly and more generally at healthcare policy, at public health, and how our public health system has been dismantled over the last 30 years and why our COVID response was so chaotic at the beginning, because not just here in Dane County or Wisconsin, but across the country, public health has been so eroded. And here in Dane County has been drastically eroded. And that is why some of our mental health responses have been weakened over the years. And so we are trying to change the narrative to really raise awareness about what public health means, what our public health system does or should be doing if it were properly supported, and changing the narrative to look at the social determinants of health. So look at all the different ways that our policies and programs are keeping people from being able to live healthy lives. And some of that intersects with the difficulty and the challenges for mental health, and some of them for physical health. And there's, you know, the mind and the body are inextricably linked. So those two things go hand in hand. But policies that make it impossible for people to have clean air, clean water, walkable neighborhoods, a living wage, to have access to healthcare, to have access to education, to have housing. Housing is so basic to healthcare. If you don't live in appropriate and healthy housing, then there's no way that you're going to be healthy, either physically or mentally. So all of these many things that all together allow us to live healthy lives, to have access to healthy food. Living in a food desert who are not going to be able to have a healthy life because you're not going to have access to healthy food. So we really need to change the narrative and change the understanding of why our country, though it spends more on health than any other country in the world, has one of the worst health outcomes. And it's because of these broader pictures, not because of people not going to their doctor or not having health insurance, although that's certainly a big piece of it, but there's so much more to it. And absolutely the mental health challenges are so incredible.
I just want to clarify, from my perspective, as one of the founders of NAMI, that there is a major difference between mental health and mental illness.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing, especially through the pandemic, and I'm glad it's come forward that people understand, or at least are saying the words mental health, but that has, in a sense, nothing to do with mental illness. And that whole arena of the care of people with mental illness has declined substantially. So when we hear in the public arena, mental health, and this is happening and that's happening, I want people to understand that it's not happening as it had previously and needs to for people with brain disorders of serious and persistent mental illness. And for me, that's a very important difference, and important for people to understand that. Thank you.
Rabbi Bonnie, I want to ask a question about if my sense of this is true, there's been more of damage to Jewish community centers, to synagogues, and there can be attitudes that we're in competition, that a Christian group would be in competition with a Jewish group, and that how can we identify that we see commonality and that we think that we're not worried about being replaced. The chants about Jews will not replace us with people who think Jews are working against us. What would be ways that you think are the most effective ways to show that a Christian congregation like ours would be in solidarity with a Jewish synagogue and a Jewish congregation?
Yes, thank you. So yes, there's been an increasing and incredibly scary rise in anti-Semitism in the last few years. There was just the Jewish Community Relations Council in Milwaukee every year issues an audit of anti-Semitic incidents over the last year. They just released it a couple weeks ago. And of course, it has increased dramatically in Wisconsin. And there's also a national audit that the Anti-Defamation League does, and it's increased tremendously across the country. And it's very scary. One of the things that Creating Beloved Community does is we talk about this every week, what our roles and responsibility is to counter white Christian nationalism. And in February, we brought Reverend Jennifer Butler to Wisconsin, and she did a series of lectures in Milwaukee and Madison. You can find them on our YouTube channel, and was talking about the primarily two Christian congregations, because not to blame anybody, but this is your responsibility, right? It's the Christian community that needs to stand up and say, when you hear these messages, this is not what the vast majority of the Christian community thinks, right? This is a very, very small, very vocal, very well-funded, very scary minority of the Christian community. And every time you hear that somewhere, or you see it in the paper, you see it in the news, or you hear somebody, or you see somebody say it online, or you hear somebody say it in conversation, you need to be the one speaking up and saying, that's not my faith belief. That's not my version of Christianity. That's not what I think Jesus is teaching. And so that's really what I would say to you is that speak up. That's the best way to counter this, is to be that prevailing voice, to say those people are the fringe and we don't believe that and it's not true.
Rabbi Bonnie, we're so happy that you're with us today and that you've taken time to be with us. I wanted to express my gratitude for your leadership in our community because so often when, for example, a couple of years ago, there were nurses at UW Hospital who are needing support in advocating for themselves. Wisconsin Faith Justices, through your leadership, was standing in solidarity and supporting them for all of us on behalf of the whole faith community, so that our healthcare institutions are held accountable as they care for our community. And it seems like so often in my life as a pastor here in Madison and Dane County, you, but Rabbi Bonnie, through your leadership of Wisconsin Faith Voices, are one step ahead of all of us in addressing the most needful parts of our community from a faith perspective. And so I wanted to express our gratitude and admiration, and my admiration for you as a faith leader. And also my question for today then is, what scriptures or faith documents inform your theology? Because I'm so inspired by it, Rabbi Bonnie. If you just want to tell me, what are a couple of texts that have shaped you into being this incredible and energizing leader that you are today in our community?
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate Midvale has been a tremendous partner in so much of our work, and particularly with the Dane Sanctuary Coalition, but other things as well. And I really, really value all of you and your pastors who have been very engaged. So Judaism has always been steeped in social justice. In my particular branch of Judaism, I was ordained. I'm a seventh generation Reform Jew. Reform Judaism, one of our foundational tenets is that some of the ritual and the kind of temple-based kind of rituals and practices of traditional Judaism, if they work for you, you should do them, and that's great, but they are kind of time-bound. But what's eternal and lasting and continuing is prophetic revelation. And so the words of the prophets, the Jeremiah standing on the street corner railing at the Israelites about you're not doing the right thing and you're not being good to each other and you're just looking out for your own greed and your own self. Those are the texts, those are the kinds of things that are foundational to Judaism in general, but to Reform Judaism. But there are two particular texts that we read when they come by in the Torah reading over the year, but also at our high holy days at Yom Kippur. We read Leviticus 19, and Leviticus 19 is called the Holiness Code. It has this refrain through it: "Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." And the rabbis wrestled with this. What does that mean? Why should we be holy? Because God is holy. Well, we're made in the image of God, but God has no image. So what does that mean to be made in the image of God? Well, it means if God is holy, we should be holy. If God is compassionate, we should be compassionate. If God is just, we should be just. If God is merciful, we should be merciful. So Leviticus 19 lays out all these different ways of being holy. And only one of them has anything to do with sacrifice or with interaction with God. And all of the rest of them are all about how we interact with each other. And they're about leaving the corners of your field unharvested so that the poor can come and glean on their own. It's about having honest weights and measures in your business dealings. It's about your courts not over favoring the poor and not over favoring the rich. It's about standing when your elder rises and walks into the room. I bet you wonder where that came from. Why do we stand up when somebody old comes in? Because the Bible tells you so. It's about not putting a stumbling block before the blind and not cursing the deaf. It's about treating the stranger in your midst as the citizen among you. So this whole long, and it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. It's meant to be a taxonomy. Here's some examples, go find more. But then also embedded in there is love your neighbor as yourself. And the other text I would look at is Isaiah 58, which again, we read at Yom Kippur. And Isaiah says, so, of course, Isaiah is speaking for God, right? And so it's God telling us, I don't care about your fasting. I don't care about your breastfeeding. I don't care about how many times you go to the temple. What I care about is that you feed the hungry and you clothe the naked and you house the homeless and you take care of the poor and the widow and the orphan. That's the kind of fast that I care about. And so those are kind of the foundational texts that I look at and that I teach when I explain why I say this is foundational to who and what we are as Jews and why we need to be engaged in this work. So thank you so much. I know you have another service coming, and I really appreciate your time and your attention and your activism.
Thank you all. We have to go to. Okay, I just already.